My name's Bill Mullen, agronomist for Seed Consultants. Today we're over here in Warren County, just outside of Attica, Indiana, on a customer's farm, looking at a piece of corn, and we're going to be looking at a field of beans later on. Purpose today is just to go ahead and see what's out there a little bit, make some comments, but for the most part, I want to go ahead and give as far as an overall picture of what's going on in Indiana, some of the issues we had, some of the things we need to look out for next year. For the most part, I would say for corn, starting out in northern Indiana, we're probably 60–70% harvested. Still have about 35% of the beans to be cut yet. I came over from Union City, Indiana, on my way here today. A lot of corn fields still be shelled, and still some soybean fields. As I get a little bit north of Indianapolis, working my way up here to West Lafayette, I see a lot more cornfields that have already been shelled off. Not that many bean fields to be cut yet. So a lot more progress over here. Also looking at southern Indiana, for the most part, 80–90% of the corn's already been shelled. People did listen to us, the seed people, saying there's problems out there in the cornfield. We need to get it harvested. And they did get it harvested. For the most part though, they still got about 50% of their beans to be cutting at. So overall, we're a little bit ahead on some on the corn, maybe a little bit behind on the soybeans. When we're looking at yields here in the state of Indiana, a lot of people are telling me as far as beans go, better than what they expected. Hearing a lot of people from northern Indiana, all the way down southern Indiana, that are pushing 60, 70, 80 bushel beans to the acre and that, all right? The beans took the stress and responded real well with a bigger yield than we've seen in past years and that. As far as the corn goes, the corn basically a little bit less than their expectations. Where people thought they're gonna have 200 bushel corn in our good black ground, we're getting that 185 to 190 in that. But once we hit that lighter soil, especially down south, our yields are dropping. We're down there in the 160s, 165 bushel in that. As we come farther north, the yield on corn seemed to get a little bit better than that. 200 bushel, 210 bushel corn. So really when we start looking north of 70, keep on going up there towards the Michigan border and that, yield potential for corn has been getting better than that. One thing I would like to say is that there's a difference out there between what was planted in April and what got planted later on in May in it. For the most part, we were able to get a stand. Our problem was on the early planted corn, we had a lot of wet weather conditions and that. It ended up we were seeing some crown rot, early crown rot on these corn plants. Seeing compaction, some sidewall compaction. As I noticed right here, where I just went in this field, and I did pull out two plants of a hybrid here. As you can see, for the first one, we have very good root development all the way around the plant. Went down deep in that. All right, so it was able to utilize the nutrients as well as the moisture to go ahead, keep the plant healthy. And basically the bottom line is, the end result is, you got here a nice size ear. A little bit longer ear, all filled out, all the way to the tip in that. All right, now, the other thing to say though is, this plant came out of the same row, not too bad, but as you could see, our roots, this was an early planted field, but our root development isn't like what the other one is. It's more, the roots are more in line with where the seed furrow is. And we have a little bit of sidewall compaction. How did that really relate to the ear development in that? Well, as far as the number of rows, we still have the same number of rows in that, but a little bit of tip back, but it doesn't have the length of what our other plant does. So we had a little bit of an issue or so where the compaction early on did affect the plant, and we're going to get a little bit more into this a little bit here in a little bit. Looking at early planted corn, it seems the biggest issue has been, besides the weather early, is that we had a lot of issues there at pollination time. All right, we were hot, dry conditions for 5 to 6 weeks in some places, and that drought issue that we had in July and August really took its toll, cut out some yield on our cornfields. Really didn't bother the bean fields, but in the early planted corn, it took its effect on the yield potential there. Now, when you look at the later planted corn seemed to take the the drought a little bit better than that. The ears filled out. As we got closer to harvest though, with our later planted corn, I saw a lot more issues with western bean cutworm, especially up north in that. And in these fields where I saw the western bean cutworm and some earworm, I started seeing some ear molds. And we're seeing some diplodia and some gibberella in the Indiana cornfields from northern Indiana down to southern Indiana. But for the most part, it really didn't hurt the yield. It made some areas in the field a little bit less, but the corn continued to yield in that. A lot of it has to do, we got the rain, especially when we needed it for the corn. Yeah, I had a little bit of tip back, but every plant had a nice size ear in that. Some of the pollinate issues in that did take its effect as far as smaller ears, but for the most part, our yields are average, and for some people, better than average. As you could see, our pith inside the stalk is pretty well shot, or we're starting to see rot here on the nodes in that. But look right down here where the crown is at, okay? This basically is starting to rot off in that. It's been rotting for a while in that. A lot of moisture here early on in that. So we're not going to have very good standability here. This field needs to be shelled here. Our problem is going to be is when we get ready to go back in these fields and shell, we need to get these fields harvested, because if not, we're going to see a lot more down corn now after this rain spell we've had in this wind, that we need to get it off as soon as possible, because any future wind patterns that come through here, we're going to see a lot more plants hit the ground. It'll be a hard time to harvest it. Now, when we come back over here and look at this plant, and the ear wasn't maybe developed quite as nice as that one, look at our crown. The crown's a lot healthier than that, okay? And it could be, you know, didn't have the water issue, maybe what this one here is and that. But this is something that I've seen, especially on early planted corn and that. Water did take its toll as far as that crown development, and as well as keeping that plant healthy all the way up. As you can see, the pith here is pretty well shot. It's dried out and having some rot at the nodes in that. Where this other plant, you know, it's still healthy enough that it's going to stand there. So that's something, I guess, right now, is you got these cornfields still standing out there we need to try to get them shelled as soon as possible in that, so that we maximize on getting all the grain into the bins, and so we can sell it this winter time in that. One thing I also like to say is our weed control this year in cornfields was pretty good. We had a lot of people went in there later on and did some early post. We had some dry conditions early on, had some weed escapes, but people had a lot more tools to use to take care of the escaped weeds and grasses in that. And it basically is paying off with the good yields are out there these days. So, you know, for next year, as we look around, especially when we go into corn, you know, I guess the big thing is we plant when the conditions are right. We can't control what Mother Nature throws at us as far as cool, wet weather and that, but we want to try to make sure that that corn plant is put in at the right time, has some heat, and will still take off without having issues that can affect the roots and affect the yield later on. We moved over to the customer's field of soybeans. It's one of the few fields that I've seen that still are yet to be cut in that. As you can see, the beans did get some height to them. With the taller beans, their biggest thing is making sure the nodes don't get real far apart, because when they get real far apart, basically we're not going to have the yield. As you can see here with our pods where they're at right now, it's really about an inch and a half between the two, okay? 3 to 4 pods, 5 pods out here, a lot of 3-bean pods. Some fields I've seen 4-bean pods, but the nice thing this year is a lot of our varieties this year in Indiana potted all the way to the top. We got the clusters in that. You know, that top foot or so of that soybean plant pretty much filled out this year. It got the rains when it needed to go ahead and size up the beans and make the pods full. And with those pods full, gave us the extra bushels that we're seeing in our fields today here in Indiana. Now, one thing is also at the same time is that we are seeing some other, in the same field, we're seeing a lot of green stems out here. And the thing about the green stems is it's more or less related to 2 different things. The growing conditions as well as the genetics of the variety in that. Some varieties will show a little bit more green stem, take a lot longer to mature out compared to other varieties in that. And the same thing is that those growing conditions had a lot of rain early, we went dry, Then in August we got those rains, and some of those varieties continued to stay green. The beans went ahead and dried down like they're supposed to be, but the stems are green. We're still seeing some green leaves out there and that. And a lot of times these plants that we're seeing with the green stems are maybe plants that didn't germinate at the same time as the other beans in the field did. So we have some issues going back to last spring, and it carried on through the stress conditions we had. The bean plants pretty much made up for it by taking in that rain, filling the pods, and we've got our higher yields than we've seen in past years in our Indiana soybean fields today in that. One other thing to say is talking with some people out of southern Indiana that went ahead and used a fungicide on their soybean fields and didn't have too much disease this year in the soybeans, a little bit of sudden death and that, but really nothing that causes problems. But putting a fungicide on there, it kept the plant healthy under stress, and these customers, these farmers and that, were able to go ahead and make that comparison to where the fungicide applied to the soybeans was given 8 to 10 bushel more than that. All right, you're looking at the price, you look at the variety, the very offensive variety, there's a good chance you're going to be able to make up that difference plus some by using a fungicide. Other times we pretty much rely on that variety to go ahead and give us that good drought tolerance, as well as giving us good disease protection. So, for next year, when you look at it, look at the variety of beans you're planting, see if it's an offensive variety versus a defensive variety in that. And then try to plant accordingly. Our diseases in corn, really didn't see much from northern corn leaf blight or gray leaf spot, all right? The plant under those diseases wasn't quite as bad. We did see some anthracnose leaf blight that did turn some stalk rot on the corn. However, the plant was still able to hold itself there and still put out a normal ear in that. Southern Indiana had some people down there that in the absence of disease, they still went ahead and put a fungicide on. And they compared it to fields there that didn't have any fungicide. And what they saw was 25 bushel more to the acre. So they were able to still benefit from the fungicide application. So next year, you got to look at your corn, see the disease tolerance, put a plan together. If it looks like you need a fungicide, make sure it'll pay off for itself. Just like corn, we want to make sure and plant our soybeans in good conditions and not have any water stress like we saw this year and that. So, come next year and that, over the winter time, put your plan together and that, make your fields, position them with your soybeans as well as your corn and that, so that when it does come right, as far as planting your crops, you've got everything ready to go and hopefully have a good, successful crop in 2017 as well.